So we'll talk about pollinators. I work for the Xerces Society, which is a nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon, focused on conserving invertebrates, that is, animals without backbones. Most importantly, insects. We are named not after the emperor of Persia, who invaded Athens and Sparta. We are named after this butterfly, which was named after the emperor of Persia. Why are we named after this beautiful little blue butterfly? This butterfly lived out in the San Francisco Bay Area and went extinct. And a group of butterfly lovers out on the West Coast said, hey, we need to make sure this never happens again. We're tired of the things we love disappearing. So they formed the Xerces Society, initially as a club, eventually as a volunteer organization. But now we have 60 staff scattered around the country. I am the only Xerces Society employee within about 450 miles. I cover most of the central US. I have coworkers in the north central. I do work in Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, New Mexico, Arkansas, and some other states. I also work for the USDA NRCS, an organization y'all are much more familiar with, I think. NRCS being the Natural Resources Conservation Service. What is the mission of the NRCS? It's a pretty colossal mission to help farmers and ranchers conserve natural resources on their property. Originally, it was soil. Now it's still soil, but many other resources, water, air, pollinators, things like that. When did pollinators get involved? When did the NRCS get involved with pollinators? The 2008 Farm Bill required that all the federal agencies that have a nexus with agriculture or nexus with pollinators, they all had to help pollinators. And the USDA has provided millions of dollars to assist farmers and ranchers and gardeners. Dallas, Texas NRCS somehow got some money to give to gardeners in the Dallas area to help pollinators. Why are pollinators important? Pollinators, of course, super important for pollinating plants so that they can produce seeds. About 85% of plant species need animal pollinators to create seeds. Of course, many of the crops we eat are dependent on pollinators. Not corn, not rice, not wheat, not our grains, but so many of our fruits and vegetables, almost all of our fruits and vegetables. And of course, the cash value of crops produced by pollinators is in the billions of dollars each year. I want to give a brief overview of some groups of pollinators. The main techs of pollinators, of course, are butterflies, moths, wasps. Some of our wasps are good pollinators. Beetles. Not all, but many species of beetles are excellent pollinators. And how about this? What is this? Looks like a bee. It's a fly. We have fly species in Oklahoma that look just like bees and visit flowers just like bees, and they're really good pollinators. The United States has over 3,600 species of native bees. 3,600 species. Oklahoma has about 500 species of native bees. 500. You go out in your garden today, if the weather's good, you'll see honeybees probably, but you might see dozens of other species of bees. Example, squash bees. Honeybees can pollinate squash crops. Squash bees are native bees that do it even better. Honeybees aren't so good at pollinating tomato. Bumblebees do a better job. Okay, a little bit of pollinator biology. The life cycle of a solitary bee, as an example. Same life cycle basically as a butterfly, 4 stages. Egg, larva, pupa, and adult. Another aspect of bee biology that's important. Bees eat pollen and nectar, both. They need both pollen and nectar in their life. So what do you need to make bees happy? You need a lot of flowers. That's one very important component. But you also need places for them to stay. You need housing for them. And it turns out that there are 3 main guilds of nesting behavior. It turns out that 70% of our native bee species nest underground. So yes, we need to have healthy soil that they can dig into. Non-contaminated soil, so that they can stay healthy. 70%. Almost 30% nest in stems. Maybe it's large stems like tree trunks, or smaller stems like the pithy stem of a sunflower or an elderberry branch. And then finally, we've got the bumblebees. And they tend to nest in small cavities. Maybe they dig out a small cavity in your compost pile, or maybe at the base of a tuft of grass, or in an old rodent burrow. But all these different nesting substrates need to be on your land if possible and need to be protected. Butterflies, life cycle, very familiar, I think, to many of you. Egg, larva, pupa, adult. What do butterflies need? The caterpillars need plants that we call host plants. Why do we call it host plants and not just plants? Well, they're the certain plants that those caterpillars need to survive and mature. And many, many butterfly species are specialists, and the next slide, I think, covers that. The adults, of course, eat nectar more than anything else. An example of a host plant specialist, the most famous butterfly in the world, not just the United States, the whole world, the monarch butterfly. And what plants do its caterpillars eat? Milkweeds. This is something I deal with on multiple times a day. I'm a bit of a milkweed biologist at this point. So, but yeah, they have to have milkweeds. And what got me into butterfly research was finding butterflies search through forests or grasslands for plants this tall, an inch tall, 2 inches tall, surrounded by a giant forest. And the butterflies, the females, are able to find the milkweeds, even if they're an inch tall, 2 inches tall. They can smell them. It's pretty miraculous. Another example of host plant specialization is this butterfly. It is our state butterfly. What is it? Black swallowtail, exactly. And that's the caterpillar. And what do black swallowtails eat in your garden? In this case, parsley, but also carrots, dill, fennel, things like that. How are pollinators doing? These are titles of a whole bunch of journal articles telling us how pollinators are doing. Overall, they're doing horribly. Really, really horribly. And we read about that in the news. Happily, of course, we just had a big wave of monarchs come through Oklahoma City and Stillwater, where I live, Saturday and Sunday. Such a big wave, it made the Washington Post yesterday. It was a wonderful article on Oklahoma and all of its butterflies. But overall, pollinators are doing poorly. And our monarchs east of the Rocky Mountains had been declining quite a lot. We don't know how they're doing this year overall. But west of the Rocky Mountains, my organization, the Xerces Society, has been monitoring them for 30 years. And their population has gone down over 99% in 30 years. Last year, we literally count them all. There's so few that we can count them now. Last year, we counted slightly over, 28 or 26? 28, I don't have my glasses on. 28,000 monarch butterflies west of the Rocky Mountains, total. That's pathetic. This species, west of the Rockies, could be headed for extinction. So pollinators, of course, need help from all of us. What can you do? They need habitat. And that is a huge part of my job, is helping people create habitat on their land. What do they need as part of the habitat? Obviously, they need the food, the nectar and the pollen that we talked about. They need shelter, those places where they can live underground or in stems. And they need safety from pesticides. Y'all, being an organic crowd, are some of the best people in the country, in Oklahoma, to take care of our pollinators, because you're going to be able to provide them all three things. When you create and restore habitat, of course, it's ideal if you can plant a wide variety of species. It's really important to reduce the impact of pollinators. This is a photo. Basswood trees in Portland, Oregon were in full bloom, and they were covered with thousands of bumblebees. And then somebody came and sprayed the basswood trees with insecticide to kill whatever little pest might have been putting little holes in the leaves. Killed tens of thousands of bumblebees. What a waste. That kind of thing is happening all the time. The insecticides that Xerces Society has more publications on than others are the neonicotinoids. We're quite worried about them. These are systemic insecticides, very commonly used in conventional farming of corn and soybeans. But also you can go into Lowe's and Home Depot and find residential insecticides with neonicotinoids. So we definitely are worried about these. Herbicides can be problematic as well. And of course, even if they're not causing direct impact on the pollinator, they can be killing pollen and nectar sources. So where can we provide habitat? Certainly we can do it on roadsides. And I am working with people in Oklahoma DOT to do more pollinator plantings on roadsides. We can do it in our gardens and yards. This is something I've been doing since 1992. It is an enormous passion of mine. It is extremely fun. If you plant it, they will come. If you plant the right flowers, the right host plants, you'll get lots of great bees and butterflies. Of course, the areas where we can do the most are the larger pieces of land, farms. Where on farms can we put habitat? Well, if you're a farmer, consider putting some pollinator habitat in a strip that we call a field border, just at the edge of the field. Or over here, you might generate something temporary, an insectary strip. Plant some annuals that are there just for the summer. Usually the field borders tend to be dominated by native perennials. The insectary strips are more likely annuals. Cover crops, obviously. You can plant cover crops that are good for pollinators. You can plant flowering hedgerows. This is particularly a big deal in California, but hopefully it'll spread east. Filter strips. Plant pollinator habitat between your field and a creek so that if you are using any pesticides or fertilizers that might go into the creek, you can help filter them away using your filter strip. You can plant them in the understory of pecan groves or any other kind of orchard. You can plant trees at the edge of your property that will help block pesticides coming from your neighbors. First, talking about native plants for perennial field borders and meadows. And this is a big focus of my work, and we have some publications over here on how to do this. Of course, I love milkweeds. I'm a monarch biologist, and I'm a milkweed biologist. And how many species of milkweeds are there in the United States? The United States has about 120. It's an extremely diverse group. They're in the genus Asclepias, but we have multiple other genera of milkweeds. They're viney milkweeds. We have some of these vines right here in Oklahoma County. This is what monarchs need. But milkweeds aren't just good for monarchs. They're fabulous sources of nectar and pollen for bees and butterflies in general. This one, green antelope horn, is the most abundant milkweed in Oklahoma. I mentioned it occurs in pastures and rangeland. It's also on the side of I-35 in springtime. If you drive from here to Dallas in late April, early May, you will see hundreds of thousands of these, hundreds of thousands on the side of I-35. This is my personal favorite. I've done a lot of research on this one. Butterfly milkweed, bright orange flowers. A little hard to grow. What kind of soil does it need? Sand. It loves well-drained soil. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like a Florida sand dune type thing, but it's got to be well-drained. Got to be well-drained. It will rot in clay soil, in heavy clay soils. The reason why I study this plant, it is such a magnet. There are pollinators that only go to this flower, and they visit almost no other flowers. Thistles. Many farmers, I should say most farmers, hate thistles. However, our native thistles are not the problem. Brandon Revis, the state range specialist for NRCS in Stillwater, assures me in his many years of looking at this issue, the native thistles do not spread rapidly. They do not cause problems. So one of my favorites is tall thistle, and that's some tall thistle on my property feeding a monarch. That's a tall thistle feeding a rare butterfly on my property. I want to make it sure you get the right message. I'm not crazy. I'm not asking people to spread all thistles. We have invasive thistles from Europe, like musk thistle. It's actually sort of against the law to have it on your property. Don't plant it. Get rid of that. The challenge is, how do you tell the native thistles from the exotic thistles? We have, believe it or not, a 92-page book to help you learn about native thistles. I don't have any to give away, but it is a free download at our website. Easy way to find it is Xerces Thistle Guide. It talks about every native thistle in the United States, including those in Oklahoma. The genus DALEA is terrific for bees in particular, the prairie clovers. The genus Echinacea is terrific for bees and butterflies alike, and for flies, and for some of the beetles. The genus HELIANTHUS, the sunflowers. Maximilian sunflower, extremely easy to grow, in bloom right now in much of Oklahoma. Pretty good food for pollinators. Swamp sunflower, in bloom right now in my garden in Stillwater. Also blooming profusely on the Indian Nations turnpike. This is a genus that not nearly enough people know about. I hope everybody within the next few years, now this does not occur in North Dakota, or barely in Iowa, but down south, this genus is phenomenal. And my 3 favorite species are shown here, and I think I have slides for each one. Wingstem, native perennial, basically the southeastern quarter of the United States. It just barely makes it into central Oklahoma, but it is native here. Phenomenal for honeybees, for other bees as well. Not a fantastic butterfly plant, phenomenal for honeybees. Very easy to grow, produces lots of seed that pretty much all germinate. Frostweed. Have you ever been in the woods in wintertime and noticed that at some of the base of the plants, there are these amazing ice sculptures? Go out this winter. That's frostweed. That's frostweed. Yeah, you've seen it. I challenge everybody out here to go out in the woods in November, December, especially early in the winter, and you'll see things like this. And it's really much more beautiful than this picture shows. As water vapor travels down the stem of the plant at night, on cold nights, it comes out the bottom, and the water molecules freeze as they come out. I don't know why it does that in that plant, but it does, and forms these amazing sculptures of ice. But frostweed happens to be the most important plant for monarch butterflies in much of Texas. It's a great pollinator plant here, easy to grow. But my personal favorite is this annual called cowpen daisy, or golden crownbeard, Verbicina and Celluloides. Extremely easy to grow, but your soil must be well drained. This is the ultimate draw for pollinators. All pollinators I know of, practically insect pollinators, like this plant. But a nice little example is, I think, from further east. We've got here in the middle a stink bug. That's a bad stink bug. It's a pest. It's a crop pest. But we've got this beautiful little wasp, tiny little thing, that lays its eggs on the stink bug. And the eggs hatch into little larvae, and the larvae eat the stink bug, kill the stink bug. So these wasps are our friend. How do we get more of these wasps? By planting buckwheat as a cover crop. Buckwheat, so research showed, as you can see here, having buckwheat as a cover crop greatly increased the rate of wasp parasitism by, over 2.5 times. So you reduced the number of these evil stink bugs in your crops by planting buckwheat as a cover crop. And there are lots of examples of this kind of thing in the literature. And again, this is a close-up photo of that publication on the table, which I encourage everybody here to obtain. Just a few shots of what's in the book. They list some grasses. Well, as you might expect, the grass cover crops aren't big draw for pollinators. Because as you know, grasses produce green flowers. Grass flowers aren't that pretty. They don't need to attract pollinators. They're not colorful, they're not fragrant, and they don't have nectar. They have pollen, but they don't have nectar. So our grasses are not great for pollinators and beneficial insects. Obviously, there are many other reasons to have grasses as cover crops, as this 2-day conference has indicated. And I did start planting my own cover crops in the last 2 weeks for the first time, and I did a mix of some of the pollinator plants and some of the grasses. But how about crimson clover and white clover? Well, our legumes tend to be pretty phenomenal. Crimson clover is one of the best. As you can see here, really high value for honeybees, really high value for wild bees, native bees, moderate value for beneficial insects. By beneficial insects, I mean the predatory things, like the little wasp I talked about a few minutes ago. How about sunflowers? Can they be cover crops? I haven't tried it, but apparently yes. Partridge pea. Partridge pea can be used as a cover crop, according to that publication, as a warm season annual, just like sunflower. And it turns out a nice long list of forbs, broadleaf plants that could be used as cover crops. Who might have more advice for you? I've been talking about Xerces Society, Xerces Society, Xerces Society. Who else might have advice, but also money? Xerces Society doesn't have any money for you. I'll tell you that. They barely have money for me. They don't I wish we had a program to give out grants for people to improve their land, but they don't. But who does? NRCS. NRCS and FSA have amazing programs of technical and financial assistance. This being one of their biggest, the EQIP program. That the EQIP program can help fund work to help pollinators. It does fund work to help monarch butterflies. Here in Oklahoma, there are people who are getting thousands of dollars of financial assistance on their farms and ranches to help generate monarch butterfly habitat. I went to the NRCS people who I work with. Believe it or not, I'm allowed to do that. Even though I work with them, I could still apply. I own 10 acres outside of Stillwater. Well, it turns out because I'm not truly a farmer yet, they wouldn't give me money. Fair enough. But they gave me advice. They came out and spent hours on my property and wrote this awesome report that told me about my soils. I didn't know what soils I had. They told me. They told me what native plants I should have growing there. They told me the potential of the property. It was extremely informative. They told me how to get rid of this menace, the eastern red cedars on my property. And then I was able to get a little bit of money from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get rid of the cedar trees. Because under those cedar trees, look, there's nothing. When you have a cedar forest, there's nothing growing underneath there. It's a desert for bees and butterflies. It's a wasteland. Maybe there's some bees nesting in the soil. That's about it. So I got some money, got myself some chainsaws, and got to work. Got my son a chainsaw. To be clear, I didn't use their money to buy chainsaws. Those trees there, I didn't saw those. I had a contractor do most of the work, but I did 200 trees. That's a lot. That was my property, November of last year. Again, this was last summer, this was last fall, and this is now. This is now. Yeah, it's pretty, well, a couple weeks ago. Massive profusions of blooms covered with bees. Like, I love this one on the left. This is great around ponds and creeks and Biden's Xeristosa, and this blue one on the right, also a native. So, takeaway message, please do all you can to create habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects on your property. Another take-home message, I work for a nonprofit. We're highly dependent on people helping us out through donations, so consider becoming a member of the Xerces Society.